Fleming in the Philippines here. And yeah, I need to do some catching up today. So first of all, I want to do a video discussing major events in Britain, which happened just over a week ago. An election was called and the Conservative Party won by a huge majority, putting to an end 3 years of confusion and despair and really catastrophe caused by people who simply did not want to accept the will of the British people as expressed in the Brexit referendum of 2016. They just didn't want to accept it, so they've been doing everything they could to defy this. And it was thrown out. They have been thrown out. Even Tony Blair, a total liar, a man who has never done anything but lie, has finally had to say, "We lost, get over it." And I have to say, this is a brilliant thing. Now, I think you should think that it's a brilliant thing, whether you were initially in favour of Brexit or whether you weren't. And that is because it gives us certainty. It has moved us forward, and it means that our political class finally, at last, has accepted that, or has had to accept, that they have to do as they're told. And that alone should be enough for us to rejoice. You know, I wrote significant amounts about Brexit prior to Brexit, but because I don't live in the UK anymore, I've tried to keep a little bit distance from it, but I still am a UK voter, and I still have a point of view, and I still have a right to say things, and I'm obviously delighted by what's happened. I think it's marvellous, and I wish Boris Johnson absolutely all the best. A lot of people don't like him. A lot of people don't like him because he's English. A lot of people don't like him because he's upper class. I don't have these problems with him. You know, I've certainly observed Boris Johnson for many years, since the early 90s, and I've never found him anything other than boisterous and affable and determined, a very determined man. If there was ever a man who was going to push this through, it was him. And maybe we should have recognised that in 2016, but we didn't. But now we're there. Today, this is the 20th, the withdrawal agreement bill will be put to Parliament. It will have it, and it will go to the Lords in the early part of January next year. Now, there is a convention that the Lords do not oppose legislation that was a part of a government's manifesto. And certainly in the case of a government that was elected with such a convincing mandate, they are really not in a position to do anything to stop it. Obviously, the Lords can cause problems, they can cause amendments, they can cause even delays, but their ability to stymie legislation is really limited. They will not be able to stop this. They might cause delays, but if they do, then they would have to realise that this is just going to increase popular discontent and the idea amongst many people that the Lords really, it's time to get rid of them, which is a reasonable point. So I don't think it's going to have a problem. I think you're going to end up that we will leave the EU on the 31st of January. And this is wonderful news. And why do I think that? You know, I don't really want to make long-winded comments about the politics, although I could. I am first moved, I've always been a Francophile. You know, I've been a Europhile really since I was a kid and first going to Europe, you know. And I was wandering about Europe alone, hitching, when I was 18, 19 years old and loving it. I loved the place. I became a Francophile very, very early on, and I found that France, more than any other country in Europe, felt really like home. There was something just nice about it, something comfortable that fitted. And long story short, I moved there in 1993 with my family. And by 1995, I had realised that the EU was a disaster. We went there and we made full use of the agreements on free movement of people. We didn't need anything like work permits or carnet de séjour, any of that. We just went there and worked and lived, and that was that. And in many ways it was great, but I could see what was happening even then. I could see the strangulation, the soul strangulation of French culture that was happening. And it was happening because of Europe. It was happening because Germany wanted France to change, basically. And when I came back, we don't need to go into why, but it was to do with the health of my mother. When we came back in 1995, I realised at that point that the EU was a very bad thing, and that we didn't have the euro then. That was a fight we still had to go through. But ever since that point, I was consistently against it, and I wanted to see Britain withdraw. Now, of course, in the 90s, if you said that, it was like, denying that there are more than two genders in the modern world. I mean, you were shot down in flames. You weren't allowed to hold opinions like that. People would just talk over you. It was terrible. You could not express a point of view that said, no, I don't think the EU is a good idea. And it was even the euro. Fighting against the euro was a big issue. There were many people in government, which was the Blairite government at that stage, who were determined to join the euro. They really wanted to ditch the pound and get into the euro, even though we'd already had problems with the ERM and, oh dearie me, loads of things. But you weren't allowed to speak out about this. And the first person, I think, that really had the guts to stand up and say, look, I'm not talking about the dinosaur generation, the people who were much older, who had always been against the EU. I'm talking about people who are my age and younger, who'd come in fairly neutral, had been quite I was certainly open to the idea. I mean, we were indoctrinated at school that the EEC, as it was then, this is a good idea. And it was only later when we saw it in action that we went, no, it's not a good idea. And I think that the first man who actually started to really make a difference was Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage was the man who focused the idea that you didn't actually have to have the EU. You could live without it. And you have to give, all of us have to be enormously grateful to Nigel Farage, or Farage. We have to be enormously grateful to this man for giving us the chance to finally break free of this monstrous behemoth. Now you have to understand that in the 1990s, the pressure for union, political union in the EU was already massive. And one of the things that was done was that Tony Blair and a number of others, but Tony Blair was really a leader here, pushed for expansion. He said, no, we don't want deeper union, we want a broader union. So he was the one, or one of them, he was certainly the prime mover in the movement to bring in Eastern European and former communist countries into the EU. His idea was that if we can dilute this Franco-German, Italian, axis, then we can have a Europe that is something reasonable instead of this European superstate that even then the French and the Germans actually wanted. Well, not the French and the Germans. I certainly could tell you right now, there are no French people who wanted this, but the French political class wanted. So that was when in late 90s, when all this was happening, that I really began to realise just how awful the EU was. And so when it finally came to 2016, and we'd put up with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown until 2010, and then it got even worse because in order to actually have some sort of control or get control away from the Labour Party, the Tories under David Cameron had to give a huge amount of power to the slimy say-anythings. That's what we call in Britain the Liberal Democrats, or I like to call the illiberal anti-Democrats. And they absolutely determined that they would do as much as they could to destroy any conservative agenda and to stymie it. But one of the things that got everything resolved was that when the 2015 election came along, David Cameron likes referendums. I don't know why. There were 3 under his watch. Anyway, he decided that it was appropriate for him to offer to the British people a referendum on European membership. And lo and behold, he won a majority. And I think today we would not hesitate to say that that majority was won because he offered that referendum. When the referendum came along, so he had a majority, he was in charge. The referendum came along in 2016. He actually campaigned to remain in Europe and lost. They lost by a substantial majority. Don't believe the Ramoners who are saying it was a narrow vote. It was 4.5 million of difference. And that was it. He lost, and Cameron vanished. He went, gone. Where is he? Where's the Prime Minister? He's gone. Instead of what he should have done, which was to take the reins and say, okay, fine, that's what we're going to do. We're going to get the best deal possible. We're going to go through and achieve Brexit without too much pain. He just walked off. That was it. He took his ball and he went home and sulked. It was an absolutely appalling indictment of the man. A man who should never, ever have any public office ever again. And I sincerely hope he does not. And so then we got the useless, vacillating, weak, and ultimately cowardly Theresa May. Theresa May had the majority. She took David Cameron's majority and she squandered it. She called an early general election that she did not need to call, and she gave the vote away. I mean, obviously, all the people who'd voted for the illiberal anti-Democrats in the 2015 election, well, they weren't being attracted now because they'd already had the referendum. You couldn't use a referendum as bait. So in 2017, the Tory majority was almost wiped out, and they ended up having to govern with the assistance of it was a minority government which governs with the assistance of smaller parties. Catastrophic, absolutely catastrophic, and that's really what allowed the Ramoners to cause as much trouble as they did. That and let's be quite honest, Theresa May never wanted to leave the EU. She's a Ramoner, and she was given this job to carry out, then she didn't want it. Why on earth she stood for the premiership, I have no idea. And she completely messed it up. She made a total disaster of it. She allowed Europe to completely walk over her and to get her to sign up to a deal that nobody could possibly have agreed to. And naturally enough, Parliament went and said, no, we're not going to have that. She got 3 attempts to get it through Parliament and eventually resigned because she said, that's it, I can't do it. Quite rightly. After which Boris Johnson was elected, and we had more pantomime as people like Dominic Grieve and various others. Meanwhile, by the way, Tony Blair is busy in Europe briefing against British interests, something that he should be prosecuted for. But we don't have to worry about that anymore now. Let's be quite clear. Britain is leaving. And the likelihood is that the Brexit that we will leave with will be a hard one, which is what we need. We don't need to accommodate Europe. Europe is suggesting now that we should sign up to conventions that apply within Europe on things like workers' rights, health and safety. They never make these demands when they make deals with Canada or with the US. Why should Britain sign up to these things? If the EU is planning to try to do this, then we don't have any choice. We simply say no, and we walk away. We have at present a £97 billion deficit with Europe, which are the ones with the power here. We control the biggest fishery in Europe. Ted Heath, a slimeball, a slug of the worst order, gave away an entire fishing industry, the biggest fishing industry in Europe, so that he could sweet talk General de Gaulle and become a member of the EEC. That all comes back to us now. And we should use that ruthlessly. And we should say to particularly the French and the Spanish, no, you cannot fish here anymore. It's finished. And that's going to cause huge damage particularly within France, but also within Spain. France has got, these two countries together have a huge fishing fleet. And France's fishing fleet mainly fishes in British waters. You know, we're going to have to invest in many new fishery protection vessels, which we've got rid of because we don't have a fishery anymore, because we're going to have to say to these people, no, you can't fish in our waters anymore. And we should say that. because these are the things that will make Europe understand that they can't do what they've been doing, that the bullying has to stop, that they're dealing with a country that is not split anymore. It's unified again under one leader with one intention. So I'll do some more on this, try and keep you up to date with what I'm thinking about it, but at the moment I feel very confident. The first readings of the withdrawal agreement will go through. There won't be any problems with these. Then we will have a year of a kind of interim period where most of the rules of the EU will still be applicant both ways, both sides, before final separation happens in the end of December 2020. And the WAB, the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, has been amended such that that period cannot be extended. And I've heard people saying, oh, that means we're going to have a soft Brexit because Europe just won't give. Well, actually, I think it's the total opposite. I really think Boris Johnson has had enough of them. And he's going, look, we are leaving, and that's it. And if you want to play silly, but you'll end up with no deal. I don't actually think he cares. I think that now that he's won with such a huge majority, I don't think he cares. I think he's like, why should I worry? I have the majority I needed. So I can hold these people's feet to the flames and make them really suffer. I can really give it to them, stick it to them in the way that they absolutely deserve. And the worst that can possibly happen is a no-deal Brexit, which is something that many people think, many economists, many politicians, many observers think is actually the best thing that could happen. So I don't think that we have that much to worry about right at the moment. I'll keep you posted. There will be more. I will go back, I think, into doing more political videos because, like I say, I felt kind of like, no, I don't really want to get involved. I voted. I did vote by post. But I kind of felt that because I don't really live, I'm kind of peripatetic, I don't really live in the UK anymore. I've just sold my house in France. God knows when I'll get the money, but hey, it's sold. So it's up in the air at the moment, but I didn't really feel I wanted to be a voice in an election in a country that I didn't actually live in. That might change, but we'll leave that just now. More to follow. See you later.